The girl across from me had been lying for 4 minutes, and I had let her, because a lie tells you more than the truth ever will. "I read a great deal," Miss Penhew said. She arranged her hands in her lap the way her governess had taught her, one over the other, thumbs hidden. "History mostly, and sermons." I opened my notebook and uncapped my pencil. The little calf-bound book had been my father's once, before it was mine. The spine was soft as a glove from 10 years of being carried. "Which history?" I said. "All of it." "Name a king." She blinked at me. Behind her, through the tall windows of the Duke of Wycliffe's morning room, the November garden stood stripped and silver, and the man himself stood at the far end of the room with his back half to us, saying nothing, as though he were a piece of the furniture, and not the reason any of us were here at all. "I beg your pardon?" Miss Penhew said. "A king. Any king. You have read all of history, so you must have a favourite." I wrote one word beside her name. Then I closed the book. "Thank you for coming. The Duke is grateful for your time, and I shall write to your mother by Thursday." When she had gone, and she went quickly, as they all did once they understood the thing was finished, I sat in the suddenly large quiet and made my next note, and behind me the Duke of Wycliffe finally spoke. "You frightened her." "I asked her a question, Your Grace. The fright was her own." He turned. I had been 3 weeks in his house and still had not learned to be ready for it. He was not a handsome man in the way the print shop windows meant the word. He was tall and dark and built like something left out in weather, and his eyes were a brown so deep they read as black until the light found them. On the back of his right hand was an old burn, smooth and pale, a scar he never explained and never hid. He had hired me to find him a wife. He had not once, in 3 weeks, looked at any of the women I found. He was looking at me now. "That is the 4th this week," he said. "You said you wanted a wife who could think. Thinking women are rarer than you have been led to believe, and they do not advertise. I am sorting the herd. And the herd is thinning. Good herds always do." I held up the book. "You will have your 3 by the end of the month, and you will choose one, and you will be married by Lady Day, and I will be paid, and we shall both be glad to be rid of the other. That is the arrangement." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. He did not have those to spare. And I told myself, as I had been telling myself for 3 weeks, that a duke who looks at the woman holding the list instead of the women on it is a man whose attention has simply nowhere better to land. I was 28. I had buried my father and my prospects in the same year. I arranged other women's happiness for a living because no one had ever thought to arrange mine. "Why does the book matter so much to you?" he asked. "Because everything that is true about a person is in how they answer when they are not ready," I said. "I write it down before they can take it back." He came 2 steps closer and stopped, as a man stops at the edge of something he has decided not to do. "And what have you written about me?" I had written a great deal about the Duke of Wycliffe. I did not tell him so. A man does not pay a stranger to pick his wife unless choosing is the part he cannot bear. The question sat under everything like a stone under a wheel, and I turned it over and over and did not find the answer for a long time, because the answer was the one place I never thought to look. The Wycliffe estate was not the house of a man in trouble, which made the trouble harder to find. The fields were drained, the tenants' roofs sound, the library reshelved within the year by someone who actually read. Whatever pressed the dupe to marry, it was not the usual one. Something was holding a candle to the soles of his feet, and a woman in my trade learns to find the flame before she promises anyone a match. Because a match made over a hidden fire burns the bride first. I found part of it on the fourth day in the person of his sister. Lady Beatrice Wycliffe was 18 and had her brother's dark colouring and none of his stillness. She came into rooms the way weather comes into valleys. She found me in the library, cross-referencing a candidate's settlement against the family's debts of honour, and she sat on the arm of the chair across from me, uninvited, and watched me work with frank curiosity. "You are the matchmaker," she said. "I am the woman your brother is paying to be unpleasant to young ladies on his behalf. Yes." She laughed, surprised into it. "He will not choose any of them, you know." I set down my pencil. "Why do you say so?" "Because he is not doing it for himself." She said it lightly, the way the young say the heaviest things, then flushed as though she had let go of something she had been told to hold. "I oughtn't. He would be cross." "Lady Beatrice." I closed the book over my thumb. "I cannot make a man a good marriage if I do not know what the marriage is for. Whatever you tell me, I have heard worse, and I have never once repeated it." She looked at the door, then she told me. Their father, the late Duke, had not been the careful man his son was. He had died 3 years before owing £18,000 to a single creditor, a private debt, secured against the only part of the estate that was not entailed, the part whose income made up Beatrice's marriage portion. £15,000, that portion, the difference between a girl who married where she chose and a girl who married where she could. The creditor had been patient. He had also, this season, become Beatrice's chief suitor's father, and had let it be understood, in the soft way such things are understood, that the debt would sleep forever if the houses were joined, and wake very suddenly if they were not. "Marcus thinks I don't know," she said. "He thinks if he marries Lydia's father's choosing, the debt goes quiet, and my portion is safe and I may marry whom I like. He thinks he is buying me." Her chin came up. She was very like him in that instant. "I would rather have no portion at all than be bought with him." So that was the fire, not poverty. Love, wearing the mask of arithmetic. I wrote nothing down. Some things you keep in the only book no one can demand to read. That evening, the Duke came to the library to ask after the candidates, and found me where his sister had left me, and I watched the scar on the back of his hand as he set it flat upon the table. The only restless thing about him, that hand, the way it went still and deliberate when the rest of him was holding something down. "Your Grace," I said, "I will find you the cleverest, kindest, best dowered woman in 3 counties, but I cannot find you one who will love your sister enough to make the trade worth it, because that woman does not come to marriage markets. You are trying to buy with a wedding the one thing weddings cannot purchase." His hand went still on the wood. "You have been speaking to Beatrice," he said. "She has been speaking to me. It is what people do near me. It is the whole of my profession." I stood, because the thing I had to say was not a sitting thing. "You are a careful man, spending himself on a careless man's debt, and you have decided that the way to protect your sister is to let a creditor pick your wife. I have arranged 40 marriages, Your Grace. I have never yet seen a good one begin as a ransom." It landed where I meant it to, the careful surface of him cracking once, the way ice cracks before you hear it. For a moment, he was not a duke at all. He was a boy who had once carried something out of a fire, and had been carrying it ever since. and had only just understood that the fire was still burning. "Then find me a better way to keep her safe," he said, low, "and I will pay you double." "I do not want double," I said. "I want you to stop deciding her life as though it were a sum to be balanced. She had rather be poor and yours than rich and his. Ask her if you do not believe me." After that, he could not pretend he had not been seen, and neither could I. I gave him his 3. I had said I would, and I keep my word. And so, on the appointed evening, I stood before the Duke of Wycliffe in his own drawing room, with the book open in my hand, and laid out the 3 best women in England, as though I were laying down cards. Miss Carstairs, who had a good mind and a kind one. Lady Honoria, who would run his estates better than his steward. And Lady Lydia Vane, the creditor's daughter, the Marquis of Stratton's only child, 19 years old, with a face like a Sèvres figurine and a promised dowry of £30,000, the largest of the 3, and the only one that made the debt disappear. I read them out. I gave each her due. I did the thing I am paid to do, and I did it well. And then I closed the book and waited for the Duke of Wycliffe to choose the woman whose father had built the cage. He did not look at the book. He had never once looked at the book. "No," he said. "No to which, Your Grace?" "No to all of them." He crossed the room, slowly, the way he did everything. A man who had learned young that haste is how you show people what you want. He stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head to hold his eyes. The fire had burned down to embers in the grate, and the room had gone the colour of a held breath. "Miss Aldridge, in 3 weeks you have written, by my count, some 40 names in that book of yours." 41. 41. His voice had dropped to the register men use for the truth, the one they cannot raise without it shaking. Every clever woman in England, every kind one, every fortune. You have weighed them all, and ranked them, and set them down in your own hand. The scarred hand lifted, did not touch me, hovered, a half-inch from the book and the woman holding it. Tell me why, in 3 weeks of writing every other woman's name, it never once occurred to you to write your own. The whole room went out from under me. I felt the thing I had spent 28 years training myself not to feel, which is hope. And it was unbearable. The way a thawing hand is unbearable. The return of the feeling worse than the numbness had ever been. There is no language for the size of the insult of being hoped at, when you have arranged your whole life around the certainty that you are furniture. "Because I am not a candidate, Your Grace," I said, and my voice was steady, which cost me everything I had. "I am the woman who finds them. The 2 are not the same trade. You have confused the inventory with the merchant." "Have I?" "You are lonely, and I am near. And I am the only woman in this house who is not trying to marry you. That is not love. That is convenience wearing a better coat." I stepped back from his hand, and his hovering, and the unbearable warmth of him. "Choose one of the 3. I will draw up the settlement myself. And if I will not, then you will be unmarried by Lady Day, and your sister's portion will." The door opened. A footman, white-faced with the importance of his news, announced that the Marquess of Stratton had called, and would not be put off, and was even now in the hall. The half-inch of air between the Duke's hand and my book stayed empty. The air went out of the room as though a window had broken. "We are not finished," the Duke said to me, very quietly, and went down to meet his creditor. The Marquess of Stratton was a charming man, which is the most dangerous kind. He was 52 and silvered and beautifully tailored, and he smiled at me in the hall as though I were a clever dog that had done a trick, and I disliked him with an instant, professional completeness. The way you dislike a forged banknote, for being so very nearly right. "Ah," he said, "the famous Miss Aldridge. They tell me you are choosing my future son-in-law's bride." The smile widened. "I do hope you choose wisely." "I choose accurately, my lord. Wisdom I leave to my clients." He laughed, and I understood that he had not heard me at all, because men like Stratton hear only the music of a room, and never the words. He went in to the Duke, and I should have gone home. Instead, I went back to the library and took out the settlement papers Stratton's man of business had sent over for Lady Lydia. And, because I cannot let a sum lie unbalanced any more than the Duke could, I read them again, properly, with the candle pulled close. A dowry is a promise made of paper, and paper can be read two ways, for what it says and for what it is afraid to say. £30,000, the settlement promised, secured upon the Stratton estates in Hampshire. But the figure was not drawn from rents, as a sound dowry is. It was raised against the land, a loan upon a loan, and when I followed the small print to its lair, I found the thing the charming Marquess had spent 10 years hiding. The Stratton estates were mortgaged to better than £40,000. The dowry did not exist. It was a hole, dressed as a fortune, and the only thing that could fill it was a duke's solvency. A duke's name draped over a ruin, so the creditors would hold their breath one more season. Stratton was not a rich man, toying with a debt for sport. Stratton was a drowning man, and he had reached up out of the water and closed his hand around the Wycliffe estate. And he meant to pull himself out using a girl of 19 and a debt of honor, and a brother who loved his sister too well to count the cost. I wrote it down, every figure, in my own small hand, in the soft old book that had been my father's. The mortgage, the false dowry, the date, the name of the bank. I wrote it the way I write everything, before anyone could take it back. And I did not yet know that in writing it, I had loaded the gun that the Marquess of Stratton would, within the week, turn upon me. The Duke refused her in public, which was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I have ever watched a man do, and I have never been able to decide which. It was at the Hartfield ball, 3 days later, in front of 400 people, with the Marquess of Stratton standing at his elbow, and the announcement of the betrothal as good as written. Stratton had moved fast. He had let it be known that the houses would be joined, and the rooms were thick with the particular electric hush of people waiting to watch a great match made. Lady Lydia stood in white between her father and the Duke, pale as her own gown, and I stood at the edge of the room where I belong, with my book, and watched the cage close. And the Duke of Wycliffe took one step away from it. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. It was the room that fell silent to find it. "I have the greatest respect for Lady Lydia, who deserves a man who chose her freely, which I cannot honestly say I have done. I will not announce a betrothal tonight. I will not announce one this season. When I marry, it will be a woman of my own choosing, and I will say her name myself, or I will say no name at all." You could have heard a pin meet the floor in the next county. Stratton's face did not change. That was the frightening thing. It stayed charming, stayed smooth. While underneath it, something went to work like machinery in a flooded mine. Lady Lydia, God help her, looked for one unguarded instant purely, helplessly relieved, and then remembered her father, and went still. And the Duke, having burned the only bridge that kept the debt asleep, turned his head across 400 people and found me at the edge of the room. He had said her name himself, or no name at all. He had not said mine. But he had looked, and a look in a room that size is louder than any name. And I felt every powdered head in the place begin, slowly, to turn and follow the line of the Duke's eyes, to the plain woman with the book. I left before they arrived. It is a skill, leaving before the room turns. I had practiced it my whole life. But I understood, going down the cold steps to find a hack, that I had practiced it as a woman no one looked at, and that something had changed. And the change was going to cost a great deal. And this was the part I had not let myself know until the night air hit it. I did not want to give it back. Stratton came for me, not the Duke. A clever drowning man does not fight the swimmer. He sinks the rope. He did it the way ruin is always done to a woman who works for her bread. Quietly, thoroughly, and through other women's drawing rooms. By the end of the week, it was understood across Mayfair that Miss Aldridge, the matchmaker, was not the discreet professional she had pretended, but a scheming creature who had wormed her way into the Duke of Wycliffe's house and turned his head against an honourable match to install herself in a duchess's chair. And the book figured large. Stratton had found the one true thing and bent it. A blackmailer's ledger, they said, in which she wrote down the private shames of every family fool enough to let her pass the door. That no decent house was safe while she carried it. I lost 4 clients in 3 days. The mothers who had waited months for me now crossed streets to avoid me. I sat in my 2 rented rooms with my father's book in my lap, and understood that Stratton had, with a dozen sentences murmured to the right women, taken the only thing I had built with my own 2 hands in 28 years. My name, my work, the small, hard-won standing that let me sleep without a husband's roof, and that he had done it, not because I mattered, but because I was the rope, and the Duke was the swimmer, and I was easier to cut. The Duke came to my door. Of course he came. He stood in my shabby parlour, looking enormous and wrong, like a horse in a kitchen, white about the mouth with a fury I had not seen in him before, and said, "Miss Aldridge, I am more sorry than I can say. I will make this right. I will go to every house myself. I will—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. "You keep asking my pardon as though the wound were mine to close, and it is not." I stood, because I would not say this sitting either. Stratton ruined his own house long before he touched my name, and your father signed the note that armed him, and neither of those is mine to forgive. You did not do this to me. He did. So do not stand in my parlour apologizing for another man's crime. It wastes the only thing we are short of, which is time. Tell me what you mean to do, and I will tell you whether it will work." He looked at me as though I had struck him, and then, slowly, the embers waking, as though I had handed him a weapon he had forgotten he owned. "I have his debt," he said. "I can pay it. Tonight. It is £18,000, and I have it, and the moment it is paid, he has no hold on Beatrice, and no hold on me. And no reason on earth to ever stop lying about me," I said. Pay the debt, and you free your sister and leave me ruined. He will simply say he was right, that I drove you to beggar yourself for love of a schemer. You cannot pay your way out of a lie, Your Grace. You can only out-true it. I picked up the book. I held it out so he could see it for what it was. The soft old cover, my father's, my whole life written small. He has told 400 people this is a ledger of secrets. So let us show 400 people exactly what is written in it. Not his enemies' secrets, his. For the first time in 3 weeks, the Duke of Wycliffe smiled. A real one, the kind he did not have to spare. And it changed his whole hard, weathered face. And I thought, with the part of me that was still keeping accounts, oh, that is what all of this has cost me. That is the size of it. What do you need from me? He asked. A room, I said. A large one, full of the right people. And I need you to do the hardest thing a man of your rank has ever been asked to do. I closed the book. I need you to stand at the back and say nothing, and let me. They gave us the room without knowing they gave it. Lady Hartfield held a card evening the following Thursday, and all of Stratton's careful work had made me the most interesting woman in London. The schemer, the ledger keeper, and the Marquis himself was there, charming, silvered, accepting condolences on his daughter's behalf, and letting it be known how narrowly his Lydia had escaped a household poisoned by a fortune hunter. He thought he had won. He had the whole room's sympathy, a duke too honourable to call a lie in public, and a ruined woman who would slink away. I did not slink. I had spent my life at the edges of such rooms, holding my book, watching the people who never watched me. And there is no better education in the world for a woman who means, just once, to walk into the middle. My Lord Stratton, I said, and my voice. I have a carrying voice when I choose. My father preached to draughty churches, and I learned how. Cut clean across the card tables. They tell me I keep a ledger of secrets. I find I cannot let so flattering a rumour go uncorrected. I keep a ledger of facts. Would you care to hear the ones concerning you? The room turned. 400 faces, the way they had turned at the Hartfield ball. Only this time, I did not leave before they arrived. This time, I let them come. You have offered your daughter to the Duke of Wycliffe with a marriage portion of £30,000, secured, your settlement says, upon your Hampshire estates. I opened the book. I did not need it. I had the figures by heart. But a paper held up is worth 1,000 words spoken. Here is the first fact. Those estates are mortgaged to Coutts and to 2 private lenders for a total of £42,000. Here is the second fact. There is no 30,000. There never was. The dowry you dangled is a hole with a ribbon tied round it. I turned a page. Here is the third, and the cruelest. You knew it. You held a dead man's debt of honour over his grieving son, and you reached for a duke's solvency to plug your own ruin, and you were willing to spend your own daughter and another man's sister to do it. You did not come to make a marriage, my lord. You came to make a raft, and you did not much care who drowned, so long as it was not you. Stratton's charm cracked at last. I watched it go the way I had watched the Duke's stillness crack. Only there was nothing underneath Stratton but more Stratton, all the way down. This is slander, he said, and his voice shook, which a charming man's voice must never do. This is a hysterical, jealous— It is Coutts, I said. Send to them tonight. I have only ever written down what could be checked, my lord. That is the difference between a ledger of facts and a ledger of secrets, and the difference you should have learned before you decided to lie about my book. I closed it. You called me a fortune hunter. I have, at this moment, no fortune and no clients and 2 rented rooms. And I have just spent the last of my reputation telling 400 people a truth that will get me nothing. Look at the room, my lord. Decide for yourself which of us was hunting. It was Lady Lydia who finished him in the end, and I will love her for it as long as I live. She had come in late on her father's arm and heard the most of it, and in the silence after I closed the book, she stepped away from him. 1 step, the same step her almost husband had taken at the Hartfield ball, and said in a small, clear voice, "It's true. I've seen the letters from the bank. Papa, it's all true," and began, helplessly, to cry. And the room did the rest. Rooms always do. I felt the Duke before I saw him. He had stood at the back, as I had asked, and said nothing, and let me, the hardest thing a man of his rank had ever been asked to do, and he had done it. And that is the thing I married him for in the end, more than the eyes or the hand or the voice. That when I told him to stand still and let a woman save them both, he stood still. He came through the parting room and stopped in front of me, and 400 people watched the Duke of Wycliffe look at the plainest woman in England as though she were the only thing in it. "Now," he said, "now may I say her name?" "You may say whatever you like, Your Grace," I said. "It is a free country, more or less." "Francis." It was the first time he had used it, and he said it like a man setting something down at last that he had carried a very long way. "Francis Aldridge, I have watched you find every other woman in England her right place. I am asking you, in front of all these people, to stop working long enough to take your own." He held out the scarred hand, not hovering this time, not a half-inch shy, but open, palm up, asking, "Marry me, not because I am lonely and you are near, because in 3 weeks of reading the truth off everyone in England, you are the only true thing I found, and I am done pretending I went looking for anyone else." I had arranged 40 marriages, 41. I knew every word a person says in that moment, the practiced ones and the panicked ones, and not one of them came to me, because I had spent my whole life writing other people's names and had never once written my own. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I took out the book, uncapped the pencil, and held them both out to him across the silent room. "I find," I said, and my carrying voice was not so steady now, "that I cannot seem to write it myself. Would you?" And Marcus, Duke of Wycliffe, took my father's book in his burned and careful hand, and turned to the last page, where no candidate had ever been good enough to go, and wrote one name, and gave it back to me. And when I read it, I understood that he had not written his own. He had written mine. He kissed me in front of 400 people, which is a scandalous thing to do, and the sort of thing that ruins a woman. Except that I was already ruined, and a thing cannot be ruined twice, and so it simply made me happy instead. We were married at Lady Day after all, which I have always thought was the book's small joke at my expense, that I hit my own deadline, having missed every chance to be on my own list. Wycliffe paid his father's debt the morning after the card evening, not as a ransom, but as a man clearing his own house. And Beatrice kept her £15,000 and the right to spend it on whatever fool she chose. She chose, the following spring, a penniless naval lieutenant with a laugh like her own. And her brother gave them the unentailed land outright as a wedding gift. The very acres a creditor had once tried to drown us all in. The Marquis of Stretton did not recover. The morning after I read his ledger aloud, his creditors stopped holding their breath. By summer, the Hampshire estates were sold over his head, and by autumn, he had taken himself off to the continent, where charming ruined men go to be charming somewhere cheaper. Lady Lydia did not go with him. She stayed and married a kind and unremarkable curate the next year, for no reason but that she liked him, and writes to me still, signing herself, "The girl you saved by ruining her father," which I think is the finest thing anyone has ever called me. There is a morning I keep, the way you keep a single pressed flower from a whole summer. It is a year after the card evening. We are at Wycliffe, and the November garden is stripped and silver again outside the morning room windows. And Marcus is across the table, reading his correspondence with his scarred hand flat on the wood, gone still and deliberate the way it does when he is content. And a footman has just addressed me as "Your Grace," without the smallest hesitation. And I have stopped, for once, expecting the world to take it back. My father's book sits closed on the table between us. I do not carry it any more. I have no herd left to sort, and I find I do not miss the trade so much as I expected. The last name written in it is still my own, in Marcus's hand. The M of Miss crossed out, and Mrs. written over, and then, later, in his careful black ink, Duchess added above. The whole soft old page a record of a woman finally arriving somewhere she had spent her life sending other people. "You are looking at the book," Marcus said, without raising his eyes from his letter. "I am looking at the last entry." And I find," I said, "that for once in my life, I have nothing to correct." He looked up then, and the light found his eyes and turned them from black to brown. And he did not smile with his mouth. He never had those to spare. But he smiled with the rest of him, which I had long since learned to read, having made my living, after all, from how people answer when they are not ready. I had spent 28 years certain I was the merchant, and never the inventory. The woman who finds the place and is never the place that is found. I had been wrong about exactly one name. It was, as it happens, the only one that ever mattered. And I am glad I let someone else be the one to write it down. Because some truths you cannot set down in your own hand. You have to be brave enough to let them be given to you.